love money and the law. So today we're going to talk about financial planning and financial wellness. But for me, I can't really discuss it without thinking about it as a family lawyer. So for today's discussion, we've got with us financial advisor and coach, Najinder Devgun. Hi, Naj.
How you doing, Sarah? You all right?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to have this conversation with you because a lot of people, when they talk about financial wellness, financial planning, automatically they'll think savings, investments, crypto. You know, you've got to have all that in order. But as a family lawyer, I can't help but always have the backdrop of the law in my mind. So all those decisions that you can't have financial planning linear without having life in between. So things
Definitely.
like marriage, divorce, buying a house. For me, all those trigger a legal issue or a potential legal problem. So today I'd like to speak to you about what could crop up, what could be the legal challenges within a financial sort of background. But the first thing I think before we get into it is, how early do those conversations start, or should they start?
So it's really interesting. I put a poll out on LinkedIn about this, about do you find it hard to talk to your partner about finances?
Okay.
And a lot of people said yes. And I actually had a few young female young professionals contact me saying, you know, I'm in medicine or I'm in engineering and I've no idea how to discuss this because I'm actually going to earn more than my partner.
Right.
Which is now, it's a generational change because if you go back 50 years, the breadwinner was the man and they handled the finances. And what it has led to is, although we've started to close the gender pay gap, there's a big problem with the gender financial literacy gap. So more women that don't know about, there's stats around kind of like women were more likely to put into cash savings instead of things like ISAs and pensions, which will give them much better growth, and over the life will lose a lot of money if they don't.
It's true that, because we've seen that as divorce lawyers, if it comes to sorting out finances, it will be more women than men, unfortunately, that will say, we don't really have an idea about the finances, you know, whether that's types of investment or whether that's the nuts and bolts of the finances in the house. Yeah. So I would agree with you on that.
I think if you're talking about, so I can use me and my wife as an example. Before we got married, we sort of had a discussion and everything was on the table. Me and my wife both owned a house each, and because we got married sort of later on, in sort of early to mid 30s, we had some cash behind us. Her parents helped us out a lot with our house, and I was really conscious that I didn't want there to be anything. As I said, look, we do need to talk about this, and I was quite happy to have a prenup. Now, I think, you know, we got some advice on it, and it's, you know, once you have kids, they're not as binding as they were. I think they're a guide, but it's a good idea to talk about it. But also, I think there's a preparation. I have a particular process I'll talk about from more of like a coaching point of view than an advice point of view of like, how do you get your head around everything you need to know?
Yeah. And
one of the things I always say is, like, I do an exercise with my clients where I say, you're going to write your money manifesto, and it's how you interact with money. What's your ideal way? How do you use debt? What's your idea on sort of savings? How much for fun? How much for holidays? And that it's not a static document. It changes over time because you hopefully earn more, you earn less. But knowing what you're willing to compromise on or not willing to compromise on. So, for example, good thing, debt. If you marry someone that gets into a lot of debt, that can cause massive problems.
Absolutely.
They're like big problems, especially if you don't know. And, you know, you've got to have boundaries, but you'll only know boundaries once you sort out what you think is acceptable and what isn't.
Yeah. But how do you get to that point? Because, and I know we're going to discuss this later, but it's actually just having that honest conversation and saying, we need to talk about money. You know, people often see it as why are you having that conversation? Is there something wrong, right? Are you proposing that there's something not right with our marriage or our relationship? Why are we having this conversation about finances? That's the bit that I think we should have more open and honest discussions about.
Definitely. And I think, so I always say to someone, don't spring it on your partner. I mean, if you think about it, like, partner comes in to the kitchen, You're there with a
Making
load
your
of statements. Like, we're going to talk about money. And he's like, okay, this is a bit of an ambush.
Yeah.
So I kind of say, like, look, do you have family meetings? Me and my wife are that couple that kind of have like a time where we're going to have a meeting about what's going on. But actually, you need to everything in it, like, because otherwise, you need 2 kids, you just don't talk about anything.
Yeah.
But say, look, next week I want to sit down for an hour and I want to hash this out. Write out what you want to say and say to them, look, write out what you want. And we're going to come together and like, because you've got to know, especially before you get married or before whatever it is, are you wildly different? Like, you can be absolutely in love or matched in many, many ways, but your attitude to money can be very different. And I suppose that's not a bad thing, I don't think.
It's not, as long as you know about it and you're happy.
You've got to know where
you
the compromises are.
Yeah.
Like, so for example, I mean, after this poll on LinkedIn, someone messaged me, I said, look, you know, actually, if your husband-to-be is spending lots of money and not saving up for deposit, and you want to live in your own house, which is fundamental, the health aspects of owning your own home are huge.
Health aspects, what do you mean?
So you're more, if you rent, you're more likely to suffer from more serious anxiety and depression.
Oh.
You're more likely to suffer from autoimmune diseases and actually more likely to have cancer.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Just because of the stress. There's lots of theories as to why. I know Huddersfield University are doing some really good research on health and wealth. I find it quite interesting the way we interact. But renting is generally it's a drain on your emotional well-being as well as.
I get that totally. But I think I've seen a new emergence of people who are adapting ownership of home, whether that's renting or being an actual owner, joint owner, sole owner, in terms of their flexibility in life. So if they want a more mobile kind of lifestyle, more flexible, then they will rent. So would that suit somebody like that better in terms of health-wise?
Yeah, I think that's a new emergence, and I think, like, you know, Gen Zs are definitely taking things in a completely different direction. Yeah. But if you want to settle down, then you are likely going to stay in one place. There's loads of aspects with home ownership. So, like, if you have kids, are the schools okay? So that's one thing. So for example, me and my wife were on the same page about this. We bought a house where we thought the schools were going to be good for the kids. Yeah. Because friends of mine have bought really nice houses, but they now have to move because they want the kids to go to a good school. Yeah. And it's, you know, those kind of things are where you put your money, invest your time. Now, if I was spending all my money and I didn't have enough for a deposit when the right house come up, because the 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom houses don't come up that often. You're talking about once every 25 years, you know, because people stay in them. As the nature of them, they are forever homes. People stay in them. So if you want that, you've got to be ready for it, you know. Yeah. And having that kind of thing about where are we going, what are we doing, what's more important, what's not more important, and having an idea of what, you know, it can be really difficult. Funnily enough, eHarmony, me and my wife met on eHarmony, and one of the things they asked was, it was like, are you in a lot of debt?
Oh, right, okay.
And it was actually like, you know,
so that starts a conversation. You already know that,
it's
right?
Actually, it's like, are you in a lot of debt? And I'm like, no, I'm not actually. But when I saw it, I was like, actually, that is important. I didn't want to be married to someone that was heavily indebted, because it's not a nice way to live. You may look nice having a really nice car and nice clothes, but actually it makes you poor. Of
course it does. I mean, that's the thing, and I advocate a lot for, even though we're involved when marriages go wrong as family lawyers, you know, we are constantly trying to have or raise awareness about having discussions about financial clarity and all the other things that make a marriage stronger before you go into the marriage, and not find out sort of 2 years into the marriage about things like debt. So, you know, if eHarmony is asking those kind of questions, you already know that that's been touched upon already in one way, shape or form. And for me, it's just that I find that people think that, couples especially, think that it's an extremely emotive subject, is money, and it can, you know, trigger if people are not being fully if they don't disclose fully about their financial backgrounds, things like debts, things like savings. You know, if people are going into the marriage later on, they've accumulated a lot of wealth, you know, they might want to keep that a little bit sort of secret. So it's a very interesting space. But for me, I just think that financial clarity is a kindness in itself, because you've already sort of dealt with it. So the thing you were saying about the house brings us nicely onto sort of the first subject that we're going to talk about. And we've had a conversation previously about this, but you've got like a catchphrase that I picked up on last time we had a conversation, which is you can't eat a brick.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that more. Why do you say that, Naj?
So I think particularly when I go into sort of people that are getting divorced, the attachment to the family home is massive, and rightly so. So like I'll talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got this bottom thing, it's like your shelter, your food, and that it fits so nicely on there. You know, I brought my children home to that house, and when I remember walking into the house and looking at it and going, I want this house. And we walked in and someone had made a really bad offer, and I just said, look, I'm going to give you everything I possibly can. I really want this house. I won't be able to hit the asking price, but I'll get very, very close. And I did this mad dash around trying to find everything I possibly could. And my wife wrote this really beautiful email saying, look, please. And, you know, because her, this is a sidebar, but like her husband had died in the house, and she had this, it was the part of letting it go. It wasn't about the money at all, but I took my first child was born, like took him home there. My second child was born, took him home there. Our Christmas is there, you know. So I think I can understand completely why people are so emotionally bonded to the house.
Yeah.
However, you still need liquidity to live.
Yeah.
And if you are going to be working part-time after a divorce, you know, you're not going to have the same amount of income. So where is it going to come from? What are you going to have to do to fund yourself in retirement if one person has got all the pension wealth? It's now actually, I think when I came to your firm, is pensions are now probably the second or the third biggest asset within a family.
Yeah, and often people forget that.
They do.
And then they it's interesting you say that, because they attach so much emotion, like you've just illustrated in your example, to a house, to bricks and mortar. I want that house. I've lived in that house. It has memories. It has an attachment. I don't care if I have nothing else, but I want the house. And we have to manage those kind of emotions to say, well, exactly what you're saying. Okay, fine. That deals with the shelter aspect. You may have children that need somewhere. And obviously the courts are going to look at the needs of any children first in a separation and divorce. But how then are they thinking about funding their life after that? Are they missing out on big pensions? Are they missing out on other savings and investments? Are they missing out on business assets?
Yeah, and I think going back to the emotional part of it, managing the emotions, sometimes I say to people, look, you're allowed to have those emotions actually, because there's a denial aspect of like, you know what, you can feel however you want. There's no right or wrong way to feel about this, but process it. And then now come back to, while you're processing it, get rid of it, and then you can look at it with a logical head and step away from it. Maybe write it in a diary or journal it, or just go and speak with a friend about what who you can really speak with. Come back and then go, right, I get that I'm feeling all of that. I'm feeling anger and grief, and I'm feeling, you know, some shame, and I'm feeling some fear. Those are the primary emotions sometimes in the negative money experience. But actually now I get those, I know they're going on. I can distance myself from it and go, look, logically, hold on, do I have anything? Because I don't want to be working until I'm in my 70s. Yeah. Which is, you know, the reality of it now is that we're living a lot longer. State pension is, you know, always every single election cycle we have is, you know, for the triple lock last. Yeah. We can't afford it. Yeah. Being frank, it's not a will it last or not. It's which government has got the backbone to pull the trigger. Yeah. Because it will be political suicide. But, you know, that is the reality of it. And, you know, you have to think about those things and go, okay, we might move, but actually I don't want to be in poverty and relying on my kids. Yeah. For retirement, you know, it's... So what are the options then, Naj, in terms of, there is a home, for example, right? I have so many examples where I have couples and the house is the main asset. We don't know how much equity is going to be in there, but they've got their heart set on wanting this house. It's usually the wife that says, I want to stay in the house because it gives her security. You know, she knows the place. I mean, should we talk first about the different types of ownership, right? Yeah, you've got joint ownership and you've got sole ownership. Yeah. If you've got the house that is in just one name, how can the other party protect themselves? So there are trust arrangements. So one client, they had their parents put a charge over the house when they gave them a deposit. Okay. So a charge, essentially, if they ever sold it, they would have to go and they would get some money back. Separation agreements, I think, you know, talking about it. and demonstrating what's changed hands. So mortgage advisors, if you have a gift from Bank of Mum and Dad, used a lot for deposits, mortgage advisors will have a standard template which they will give you for parents to sign to say, we have given this as a gift to you, because one, it has to be where have you got it from.
Yeah.
But two, that is kind of evidence of this is what's gone in.
Okay.
And tracking what people have, what you've said. So, you know, if, for
That's very
example,
important, actually.
one partner has said, okay, I'm going to build a business, but I'm going to rely on your, you know, final salary pension, that needs to be documented, because one person will act in detriment.
Yeah.
You know, will not have that kind of access to that.
Because they've been waiting for this payout. So, okay, if we can break it down into before marriage, or a couple are just cohabiting and there's a property, what would they do to protect themselves in that position?
You can get a deed of ownership.
Okay.
So who's got before that, there's two ways to own a house together jointly. So you can have it jointly, which is both of you will own 100% of the house and there's no divisible share.
Yeah.
That is actually very common, that people just buy, when they buy their first home, they put it as joint ownership.
That's right, yeah, we see that mostly.
But actually, you know, there's such a fundamental thing as you can own as tenants in common, where you both own a divisible share, be it 50-50, be it 70-30 in one person's favour, is a much more coherent, you know, much more tangible, much more
it actually
specific.
Sets it out.
It says something like, this is how much it is. And, you know, I've met people that have just they've got no idea, okay, my parents put this in. So, our example, my wife's in-laws, they put a lot into our house. And I said, look, you know, I don't expect any of this for me. It's for, and they were quite simple, especially when we had kids. It's like, look, you know, it's for your grandkids, not for you. And I was quite happy to sign something to say, look, you know, it wasn't my money that went in. I sold a house.
And so that was in contemplation before you were married.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for couples who are either wanting to just cohabit, who are not married, then protection would be to have this form of kind of trust.
Yeah, so a deed of ownership.
Deed of ownership.
So basically it specifies who
owns what.
Yeah, who owns how much of a particular asset.
Yeah, okay.
Is a good way to start.
I suppose if then we're looking at a couple who is not just cohabiting but thinking of marriage, then a prenuptial agreement would be something that would be useful as to what would happen if the marriage broke down, what would happen to the property. That could be dealt with.
Yeah. And I think going back to the point around approaching a conversation, a prenup, you know, I suppose is drafted by a solicitor, but I think you'll probably know, you can only do as much as you can do with what the couple brings you.
That's right.
So like if they don't give you proper instructions.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the requisites of the prenup, right? There's got to be full financial disclosure. And if there isn't, then it could fail. So that's the thing. But I mean, generally, obviously, we're not giving advice here. This is just guidance for what to discuss, what could be done to protect yourselves if you're in this position. So if you've got a married couple that are married already, and for the sake of argument, for this example, we'll say they're joint owners, as you described earlier, then what are the tools they could use to protect themselves in the future? So
first thing you can do is you can get you can sever the tenancy to the house to get as tenants in common.
Okay, so you would advise that rather than
there's
joint tenants.
Yeah, there's aspects of it that are useful for estate planning as well.
Yeah.
So you can half of the house can go into a will-based trust with so. Basically, it means that the remaining on death, the remaining spouse has the right to live in that house, but it means it's protected. So if something happens to the remaining spouse, they get into debt, it's not taken. Again, talking into deeds of ownership, and generally just making sure there's full financial disclosure of what's going on. Like you know, it's not unusual for people to rack up huge debts or give personal guarantees. So, for example, business loans. One person will take out a business loan, and it might be the husband or the wife, and they'll sign a business loan, but they won't say that they've got a personal guarantee over their property, which is a big thing. Yeah. Especially if it's a startup, because nearly every single startup loan company will ask for a personal guarantee because the business is so young. Yeah. It doesn't have a trading value. We see that a lot on dealing with divorcing couples, is that there's all these kind of additional loans that the other partner didn't realise they were signing up to, or what the actual consequences
were. So financial literacy about what is going on in your setup, what is going on in your relationship, it has to be, it's so important to have that clarity so you know what you're signing up for and what the consequences are of that, because it could impact any settlement in the future.
I think that's kind of our to plug, but 2020 financial planning, we give you financial clarity.
Yeah.
Is the thing of like, you know, you might make a decision, whatever decision you make, but make it knowing everything you should know.
Yeah.
Knowing all the facts and all the scenarios that will play out.
Yeah.
And in terms of talking about going back to the house, what are you willing to risk and what are you not? So when I started the business, my wife was very clear: the house is not up for grabs. Fair play. Yeah. I don't particularly want to lose it either, if I'm honest. But it was very like, look, no, the house is you do, and that's absolutely fine, because I'd rather, you know, we just have that in there open. She's like, well, you know, of course, you wanted to start a business. She always knew that when we met. But the house is not up for grabs because this is our house. And absolutely, I would never want to move out of my house. I love the place, but it's having that kind of very frank, open, honest conversation. It's
about practical, isn't it? It's about giving the options as well, because, you know, I'll often get one of the husband or the wife saying, I want the house. It's got this attachment to it. It means this to me. I don't care about anything else. He or she can keep the business. But the first, I think, practical challenge is, can you maintain the mortgage on that property if it's a big property? Who's going to pay the mortgage? Where's that going to come from?
And, you know, that's a thing at the moment of, like, you know, mortgage rates now have shot up.
Yeah.
They're now, you know, you're talking over 4% at the moment. Whereas previously, mortgage rates have been sort of 1.5%. Now, I have clients that are remortgaging and they're going from 1.2% to 4.5%. Wow. Now, if you've got to pay that amount of money, this is probably an argument to have a whole house paid off. If you have to buy a partner out of the house, you've got to be willing. You've got to find a mortgage. You've got to get a mortgage at that amount of money. Can you afford it? Have you sat down and actually done a budget of what you're spending now, and a budget of what you're going to spend in post divorce?
Yeah.
Because there's no longer the shared cars. Do you drive?
Yeah.
There's no longer the perks from the work or the gym membership, all those things you want to keep.
You can't carry on 2 lives with 1 income.
No.
Or how you were used to living as a couple.
No.
With just 1 income, if they've got an income at all.
And the reality is now, actually, for a lot of couples, myself included, actually, to have the life, if you want an aspirational life, both people in a marriage have to work.
Yeah.
I don't know many of my age, be it either through aspiration or just necessity, where both people don't work. Both, you know, whatever, you know, man, woman, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know many. I don't know any.
So there's got to be from my point of view as a family lawyer, there's got to be a reality check.
Yeah.
If you're coming to a point where you are separating, right? Whether that's divorce, whether you're a cohabiting couple, and you've got to have a reality check about the numbers. And for me, knowing the numbers is fairness. If you know the numbers, full financial disclosure, then you can aim at fairness, because that's what a family court will try and do if you get a family court involved. But in a nutshell, Naj, from you, for anyone whose main asset is the house, and they came to you and said, how do we protect our future financial wellness with this asset? In a nutshell, what's your take on that?
Start as you mean to go on. So have some savings aside from the house.
Right.
You know, don't just invest all your eggs into one basket. Simple things like ISAs, start your own personal pension, you know, things like that. Just a nest egg. Maybe think about, if you're taking a career break, factor in that you might want to go back and keep yourself up to scratch with what you're doing. Are you able to generate an income is really important. Other things like, you know, having conversations about what you're going to inherit. You know, if on divorce, can your parents actually help you out? And because that has, some of my friends personally, that has happened where they've got divorced and, you know, their parents have just said, right, we'll pay off the mortgage, but you're not going to get this amount. Knowing what's there and what's not, because as I say, you can't eat a brick. You just can't.
I like that, yeah.
Having your parents, if they have put that money into, asked to put, say, 20, 30 grand for a deposit,
Yeah.
which is probably the minimum I'd imagine for a deposit now.
Yeah.
You know, actually say to them, can you put a charge on the house so if something happens, you'll get your money back.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, things like that, and just tracking your finances. Track your finances. I'd say your budget should be sustainable. You can't last on no fun, no
You've got to be, you've got to build that into it.
50% should go on your essentials.
Yeah.
30% goes in saving, 20% goes into fun, whatever you want.
Yeah.
Now, at different times of your life, it will skirt beyond those. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it is a guide to say, look, can you do this? Also, know what each other's got. Interesting question.
Easier said than done, though.
Yes,
right.
Very true.
Yeah.
I always ask a question. I do. Can your partner have a secret bank account? Because to me, a secret means they're supposed to disclose it to you and they haven't.
Yeah.
Now, I take the view, my partner's money is my partner's money. We have a shared bank account. We each have our own bank account. Now, if it's something that is not going to affect me, I don't expect my wife to every single nook and cranny. I know she's got ISAs in places. I don't know.
You say that now, though. But if anything happened, you'd be like, hang on a minute.
Yeah. But
that's been generated during the marriage.
No, this was before the marriage. But
no, but
still, there is that point.
Yeah.
I think going into it, there is an issue there around actually what do you disclose and why. If there is a family trust, for example, which some people do, they do have these sort of, there's been a big inheritance, it's gone into a trust of some kind, and it's not just up to them. So, Okay.